ocean. Here we find exaltation of elemental emotions and primitive style. These words are very important, elemental emotions and primitive styles. It means here we find a tendency to go back to the nature. Then we have Goethe's Werther, where hero frankly admits, ocean has dispossesses Homer in my heart. And Wordsworth, in one of his own important confession, admits, there can't be a doubt that these mountain monotones took the heart of the Europe with a new emotion and prepared it for that passion for mountains which has since possessed it. Then we have other poets like Thomas Gray. His work Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard was a lyric which was a widely read poem during his period. His primary theme was death and life of the humble people of the village. In fact, Thomas Gray, William Collins, Christopher Smart, William Cooper, they all together stand at the crossroad from where there is a clear-cut departure from the age of classicism. We have William Collins, who wrote Pity, Fear, Simplicity, Evening. These are the words, which were the catchwords of this particular period, which we never found during the classical period. We have Christopher Smart, who wrote Songs of David, composed in asylum, note of sublimity. The word sublimity is very important. Then we have William Cooper, Victims of Melancholia, spent time in St. Album Asylum, and the task, first-hand observation of nature, anticipates Wordsworth's mystic vision. So we have again Thomas Chatterton, his Rowley poems, qualities of medievalism, and unfortunately he committed suicide. In fact, Cooper, Chatterton, all these writers, there is one noticeable fact that most of them had some sort of lunatic inclination, and they all suffered from a sense of melancholia, which is one of the traits of romanticism. We have George Crabbe, who marks an important link between 18th century neoclassical period and romantic tradition of age. In a rush up to all these things, now we come across to our main concern, William Blake. He was born in 1757 and died in 1827. But his main period was, 1750 to 1800. He was a great poet, artist, seer, belonged to the 18th century by accident of birth. As you know, this period was a period of industrialism, so materialism was overriding concern of that period. He detested materialism of his age. He represented human beings beset with evil and yet desperately striving for the divine within them. He was always concerned with the sufferings of the common people, common human beings. Then we can say, through his approach, through his belief system, that he was a mystique and visionary who always glorified imagination and intuition as no other poet did. His style. When we go through some of the works of William Blake, we find there is a commingling of painting and poetry in his imaginative vision. He used symbols to convey his vision in an ordinary poetic vocabulary. He was very much under the sway of Swedenborg, a Swedish philosopher, Jacob Boehm, he was a German mystic, and Paracelsus, a German alchemist and astrologer. You just see, all of them are philosophers or a mystic or an astrologer. It means there was an inevitable influence on his thought process. Then we have poetical sketches, his first work, which appeared in 1783. Then Songs of Innocence, his first poem showing maturity. In this particular poem, he admits poetry must be pure in inspiration and spontaneous in expression. When we come across this spontaneous word, he anticipates our typical romantic period's assertion that a poetry should be an spontaneous expression of a spontaneous powerful feeling. So he was literally anticipating emergence of Coleridge, Wordsworth in this process. This particular songs includes Lamb, Cradle Song, Nurse's Song, Chimney Sweeper, and here we can say that he concentrates on the innocence. Next. Then we have songs of experience. The songs where he preferred to express all these things in his personal symbols. Songs of experience primarily deals with suffering and oppression of the common people. He says that childhood experience is okay, childhood innocence is okay, that is a pure thing, but that is incomplete in the absence of experience. And in the process of growth, inevitably suffering and oppression will come into play, and this suffering and oppression have literally darkened poetic mind. So here he asserts that evil has its own utility, element of destruction has divinity in itself. So here we have the complete cycle of destiny. Then a most important and most famously widely read poem, The Tiger. Here we have a rare poem which has rare ecstatic quality but are replete with symbolism explicable on different levels of meaning. He was a master of symbol, he was called a myth maker, and in songs of experience he used his personal symbols, but in Tiger, or because he always makes a clear distinction between his prophetic work and his songs. Songs always carries his personal symbols, personal myths, but here where we find prophetic works, we have works of Book of Thel, we have Tyriel, we have the marriage of heaven and hell. Here we find constant reference to some of the mythical figures which he takes recourse in order to express his own ideas. The marriage of heaven and hell, is an attempt on the part of the poet to bring about a synthesis, which he has already done by writing the two different states of soul in songs of innocence and songs of experience, because they are complementary to each other. That's why he accepts that contraries are important for progression. Here also we find two contrary things, marriage of heaven and hell. In this process, what he says, that the body is a portion of soul discerned by the fine senses. He accepts this body as a representative of God, because this body contains imagination, and he considers imagination as the presence of God in human being. So the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Here a very disturbing assertion, because this excess was not at all allowed during the period of classicism. There was a complete control over emotions and everything, but here he advocates the importance of excess emotions, play of excess emotions in the poetry itself, because he was totally against any hamstringing of free life of imagination. That's why he detested traditional ethics, orthodox morality, etc. Language. He accepts in his prophetic books that he used complex metrics of symbols which were essentially lyrical. As my earlier assertion, I have already told that in his most of the prophetic works he used his mythical figures drawn from difficult like Bible, all etc. Though he refers to biblical instances in songs and experience also, like the Lamb, the God of Providence, etc. But his revolt was aesthetic. He apprehended universe intuitively. There was a direct sensuous apprehension of life and recreation of life into the feelings. He was, in this process we can say, he was very much near to metaphysical, and his approach goes deeper than Wordsworth. Here I would like to mention his emphasis on malevolence versus benevolent. Wordsworth, who always considered nature as always benevolence. That's why his emphasis on education of nature. He always considered nature as a mother. But he was very much near to Coleridge, because Coleridge himself has admitted that if I and you are here, then who is the third behind us? Nature in its tooth and claw. All these are indicative of those destructive forces those, we can say in inverted comma, evil forces. But William Blake never accepts it as evil forces, but he always accepts it as creative forces, which is very much present in Tiger, which Mr. Pandya will deal in detail. In his work, we find touch of melancholy, which is suggestive of Milton, grand sublimity. So all this particular period was an embryo which threw Blake on the forefront, and we can capsulate here by saying that though he is a class by himself as a poet, his spiritual kinship with the romantic is seen in his idealization of childhood, the childhood experience. His reliance on intuition and strong emotion of sources of inspiration. After Elizabethan, he is the first poet to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of hand and eternity in an hour. So this particular part can be summed up by saying that his approach was from concrete to abstract, from physical to spiritual, from body to soul. Mr. Pandya, sir.
Yeah, Blake did emphasize on energy. Since his childhood, he was a visionary, and he joined Besire, the engraver, and from his childhood he had visionary powers, and his engraving continued to till his death. He, however, continued to work on his visionary experiences. This led him to ignore formal aspects of life and art. His drawings were brought and exhibited at Royal Academy. His friends assisted him to publish his first book called Poetical Sketches in 1873, as Dr. Pathak has mentioned. He saw possibilities in human nature, and particularly human energy. That is what is very significant. The marriage of heaven and hell, for example, brings to the climax his insistence on the importance of humanizing energy. In this poem, he affirms the superiority of energy over reason and overturns the traditional conceptions of holiness by his affirmation that everything that lives is holy. This led to the creation of new mythology of his own. The first book of Urizen and the Four Zoas, very important collection of poems. He countered the orthodox Christian picture of a world that had fallen by creating a poetic universe in which he demanded purity and holiness. In his writings, we find importance given to minute details, and therefore we find individual lines or stanzas that have self-contained meaning and resonance independent of its context. As Dr. Pathak had earlier mentioned about the to see the world in a grain of sand and hold flower and see heaven, that those quotes can be an individual lines, or they can have self-contained meaning. Songs of innocence and experience present simple common objects of everyday familiarity with images to suggest rich symbolic associations. His well-known poem and much analyzed one is Little Lamb, Who Made Thee? His poems always start with questions. This is the age of reason. He may have differed from his period as a visionary, as a mystic, but still, the questioning is there. Who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream or over the mead, gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I will tell thee. Little lamb, I will tell thee, he is called by thy name. For he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. A little child, though a lamb, we are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So, for a simple reader, it may be a poem on an animal, but it's not so. It's infused with a lot of symbolism. The lamb for innocence, and the child represents innocence. Another, the mirror image, or the another aspect of life, it is projected in experience. The tiger. This is the poem written by himself and the drawing of tiger. The poem here, tiger, tiger burning bright in the forest of the night. I mean, we cannot go on reading. These are written in 4 lines each. So let me complete the poem. And once again, there are questions. The important questions are here. What dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace thy brain? What the anvil? What dead grasp? Dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Very important question. Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? See here, the rhyming pattern is the tiger. The spelling of tiger is different from what we spell today. The spelling of tiger was common at that time. This poem is a part of his poetry collection, Songs of Experience. This is well known and most analyzed poem. The poem is written in trochaic tetrameter, but some lines fall into iambic tetrameter. To understand the poem of Blake, we need to understand his use of symbols. One of the central symbols is the creator as